Chapter 1. Shadows Beyond the Veil. In a forgotten corner of the earth, near an isolated village hidden between high mountains and ancient forest, there was an old legend, whispered only in the darkest nights, when the wind seemed to sing a sinister melody. It was said that beyond the border's visible world, a thin veil separates reality from a hidden dimension, a realm of shadows where evil smolders, waiting for a moment of weakness to sneak into our world. Many ignored these stories, considering them just fairy tales told by elders to scare disobedient children. But for a man named Roderic, a young shepherd who lived in this village, these legends had come true in a way that would change his life forever. It was a cold, moonless night. The sky, covered with heavy clouds, seemed to press down on the earth, and the wind it blew with unusual force, leaving an oppressive silence behind. Roderic, back from the fields, was in his modest hut, trying to finish his evening meal. Suddenly, a strange vibration went through the earth. The clay plate on the table it swayed slightly, and the fire in the hearth flickered as if threatened by an unseen force. "What's going on?" muttered Roderic, rising hastily. There was something strange in the air, a strange heaviness, as if nature itself had held its breath. Determined to find out the source of the disturbance, Roderic put on his cloak and stepped out into the night. Stepping outside the hut, was greeted by an unnatural silence. No night bird sang, no owl pierced the darkness with its screech specific. Even the wind, so restless a few moments before, had stopped, giving way to a sinister calm. In the distance, above the forest that surrounded the village, a strange, faint light, the color of a ghostly blue, pulsed in regular rhythms. It was like nothing Roderic had seen before, and his senses warned him that it was not natural, driven by a curiosity that exceeded fear. Roderic started towards the source of that light. Each step seemed heavier than the last, and the surrounding darkness seemed to grow denser. Reaching the edge of the forest, the young shepherd stopped for a moment, contemplating the thick shadow that seemed to stare back at him. "I have to find out what's going on," he told himself, encouraging himself. Stepping into the forest, he immediately felt the air grow colder. The trees seemed to be taller, more menacing, and their twisted branches bent towards him like hands, skeletons. Although he knew the way well, everything now seemed changed, as if the forest itself had turned into a foreign place. With each step, the light, the blue, grew more intense, guiding him to a hidden clearing. Arriving there, Roderic stopped, unable to believe what he was seeing. In the center of the clearing, the ground was furrowed with cracks that seemed to glow a spectral blue. Above them hovered a circle of light, a transparent portal that vibrated and pulsated like a living heart. In the middle of the portal, moving shadows, like deformed figures, seemed to he waited patiently, trying to get past. "What is this?" muttered Roderic, backing away in terror. The portal seemed to sense his presence. From within it, a shadow darker than all others began to take shape, with no definite form, but radiating immense strength. The creature seemed to engulf him, looked directly at Roderic, even though he had no eyes. "Mortal," a cold, deep voice, like the echo of a grave, echoes from the portal. "Your time is drawing near. You grow weak, and your world will be devoured." Roderic froze, unable to even move his fingers. His entire being was trapped by that dark presence. But just when it seemed the shadows would swallow, a warm golden light burst from one side of the clearing, countering the darkness. Out of that light appeared a thin but imposing figure, wearing an emerald green cape and a shining diadem on her forehead. She was Nimr, a powerful elf from Elfland, sent to watch over the balance between the worlds. "Get out of here, creature of darkness!" Nimra shouted, raising a hand that held a glowing wooden scepter. A wave of golden energy surged from the scepter, striking the portal and weakening its connection. The shadow retreated, but not before leaving a final warning. "We will return. The portal cannot be closed forever." The portal began to fade gradually until the blue light disappeared completely. The earth seemed to breathe again, and the cracks in the center of the clearing closed, although their traces remained visible, like a deep scar. Roderic, though still trembling, found the strength to speak. "What was that? Who are you? What's going on?" Nimra approached him, studying him with her eyes as blue as the morning sky. "My name is Nimra. I'm an elf from Goblin Land. You man witnessed an event that shouldn't have happened. The portal you saw connects your world to Gromy Land, a shadow dimension and evil. It's a place that should remain closed, but something or someone is trying to open it, and if they succeed, your world will be destroyed." "And what can I do?" "I'm just a shepherd," said Roderic, feeling overwhelmed. "You are not just a shepherd, Roderic. The fact that you have been drawn here shows that your fate is tied to this fight. You will find your courage and strength as we advance, but now we must go. The portal won't stay closed for long, and the shadows will try again." Nimra held out her hand to him, hesitating, but realizing he had no choice. Roderic took it that moment. A light gold enveloped them both, and the clearing disappeared around them. He found himself in a completely different place, a magical land filled with light, vivid colors and lush vegetation. It was the land of the goblins, a place he had only heard of in legends, but which now seemed to be his only hope. Here Roderic would learn more about the portal, about the creatures that guarded it, and about his own mission. But above all, he would learn that even the simplest man can become a hero when his courage is tested by darkness. Thus began Roderic's adventure. A journey that would change his destiny, and that with the fate of both worlds would be decided. Roderic timidly stepped onto the shining earth of Elfland, trying to contain his awe. The world around him seemed torn from a dream. Massive trees with silver foliage stretched their branches toward a sky where the clouds danced in hues of gold and pink each. Blade of grass glowed faintly, and a crystal-clear river flowed nearby, emanating a music soft, like a whisper of water. The air was charged with a sweet and refreshing scent that seemed to clear her mind. Nimra stopped by an old tree, with bark that seemed to be covered with runes. She turned to Roderic, who was still. He looked around, stunned. "It's time to explain more," she said in a calm but firm voice. "This is Elfland, a place where magic flows through everything you see, maintaining the balance between your world and the supernatural dimension. We're the guardians of that balance, and the portal you saw is a direct threat to both worlds." Roderic shook his head, still confused. "But why now? If this portal has existed for a long time, why is it opening only now? Who or what is trying to get through it?" Nimra sighed deeply, and her face, until then serene, was overshadowed by a trace of concern. "The portal to Gromy Land was sealed centuries ago by the goblins and great mages of your world. But the balance is fragile, and the power of the portal can be awakened if the negative energy in the mortal world grows high enough. Hate, despair, greed, and destroying nature weakens the barriers between dimensions. Someone or something in your world has begun to manipulate these energies, helping to open the portal. But who would do that? Who would want to bring the evil of Gromy Land to our world?" Roderic asked, not believing what he was hearing. "This is a question to which we still do not have an answer," answered Nimra. "But we know that the Gromy Land harbors nightmarish beings, creatures of the dark who yearn to regain their freedom. The first shadow that tried to pass through the portal Morvac is only the beginning. If the connection between the worlds grows stronger, others will follow." Roderic ran his hand through his hair, trying to organize his thoughts. "And what can I do in this whole story? I'm just a shepherd. I have no knowledge of magic. I'm not a warrior." Nimra smiled slightly at him, but seriousness shone in her eyes. "The fact that you witnessed the opening of the portal is not a coincidence. You are connected to this story more than you think. In your world, people have lost touch with magic and nature, but you have a rare gift, a pure soul, uncorrupted by greed or hatred. The elves need people like you to restore balance. We will need your courage and heart for what lies ahead." As Roderic tried to process these words, another figure appeared from among the glowing trees. She was tall and graceful, with an aura of authority. She wore a cape of gold and silver, and the delicate crown on her head shone like a star. Queen Lirinal, ruler of the elf land, was walking towards them. "Roderic, welcome to our land," she said, with a soft but powerful voice. "Nimra told me about you and the portal. Your presence here is more than just an accident. I think destiny brought you into this fight." Roderic bowed awkwardly, not knowing how to answer a queen. "I want to help, but I don't know what I can do." Regina looked him deep in the eyes. "The first step is to understand that this fight is not just ours. It is all living beings. Goblins cannot fight alone against the shadows of Gromy. We will have to unify the human world with our world. Only together can we face what lies ahead." "And how do we do that?" Roderic asked, his voice trembling slightly. The queen smiled enigmatically. "We will start by finding the Codex of Oblivion, an ancient book that contains the knowledge needed to seal the portal. But for that, we need allies from your world. You must go back and convince the leaders of the people to join us." Roderic felt how the weight of this mission weighed on him. Was he ready for such a responsibility? Doubts rose in his mind, but Nimra's encouraging look and the determination in Regina's voice gave him courage. "I will do everything I can," he answered, determined. "Then let's not waste time," said the queen. "We must start at once. Time is not on our side." Thus Roderic, a simple shepherd, set out on a journey that would take him not only back to his world, but also in the depths of his own will. The alliance between elves and humans was the first spark of hope in a battle that would change the fate of both worlds. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Alliance. The stillness of night had fallen over the goblin realm, But at the heart of the magical world, a commotion smoldered. The silver moonlight seemed to dance on the leaves of the trees, reflecting the tension in the AIRN Queen Lirinal's palace built of sparkling crystals and delicate magic fabric. The elves had gathered to discuss the future of the alliance, in a round room with rune-covered walls, ancient ones that seemed to pulsate in rhythm with the energy of the place. Roderic sat silently between Queen Lirinal and Princess Ilora, the young shepherd, although overwhelmed by the grandeur of the space and the surrounding beings, kept his back straight, determined to fulfill his mission. You must understand, Roderic, the Queen began in a calm but firm voice, that your world is as important to the universal balance as ours is. Without the help of mortals, our magic will not be enough to close the portal. It is necessary of a combination of your strength and our magic. Ilora, the Queen's daughter, stepped in. Her beauty was radiant, and the aura of light that surrounded her seemed to inspire both calm and strength. But not all mortals will understand what is happening. Most have lost their connection to magic and nature. It will be difficult to convince them to join us, especially those who have not felt the presence of evil in Gromy. Roderic passed hand through hair, visibly disturbed. You are right, those in my world have become skeptical. Everything they cannot see or touch with their own hands seems like a children's story. How will I be able to make them understand the danger that is approaching? Nimera, who was sitting in a corner of the room, approached, raising a reassuring hand. You will not be alone before you leave. You will receive our help. We will send 3 elf girls and 3 elf boys with you, each with a special gift. They will be tasked with watching over you and giving you support on your mission. The Queen raised her hand, and a group of young elves entered the room. The girls had sparkling eyes, long silver hair, and their clothes seemed to be made of yarn of stars. The boys had sure eyes and cloaks that seemed to absorb the light, like living shadows. These are Aelana, Miriel, and Selena, said Regina, indicating the 3 girls. Aelana can manipulate light to hide or reveal the truth. Miriel can communicate with animals, and Selena is a master of plants, able to make nature answer her call. Looking at the boys, Regina continues. And these are Kale, Taran, and Lysar. Kale has incredible strength. Taran can control wind and fog, and Lysar can sense negative energy around and warn the group of hidden dangers. Roderic looked at them with admiration and a hint of relief. He was no longer alone in this mission. But before leaving, the Queen intervened. There is another person who will play a key role. She is a woman from your world, one of the few mortals who still possess knowledge of ancient magic. Her name is Kalindra. Calendar? Roderic asked, raising an eyebrow. I've never heard of her. Where can I find her? Ilora picked up an old book from the table. Its cover's made of black leather and engraved with golden symbols. Kalindra lives in a secluded village, close to the Eternal Mist Mountains. She is the last guardian of the knowledge about the Codex of Oblivion. She is the only one who can read this book in its entirety, and who can help you find out how to close the portal for good. Roderic feels stomach clench. Each step of the mission seemed more complicated than the last. Not only did he have to convince the humans to join the elf, but now he had to find a woman he knew nothing about, in a place that sounded both dangerous and mysterious. How will I get to her? He asked, looking at the group of elves that had been assigned to him. Nimera replied. You will set out tomorrow, and the elves will guide you through the forests and mountains. They know the way and will protect you from the dangers that might lie in wait. Kalindra will recognize the elves as allies and give you help. Queen Lirinal rises from her throne, her crystal, stepping towards Roderic. She handed him a small silver amulet, engraved with an ancient symbol of peace and alliance. Take this amulet. It is a sign of our trust. Kalindra will recognize it and know that you come in peace. Roderic received the amulet, feeling the symbolic weight of the object. He looked at the Queen, at Ilora, and at the young elves who were looking at him seriously. I will do everything I can not to disappoint you, he said, determined. Ilora looked at him intensely, her eyes shining like 2 stars. Remember, Roderic, this fight isn't just about defeating the shadows. It's about restoring the bond between humans and nature, between you and the magic that was given to you at the beginning of time. If we succeed, we'll not only seal the portal, but restore balance lost to both worlds. With these words, the Queen raised her hands, and the room was flooded with a warm light. The elves began to sing an ancient hymn, and Roderic, he felt a wave of strength and courage pass through him. The night passed quietly, and the morning brought with it the beginning of a journey full of challenges. Roderic, accompanied by the 6 elves, left the land of the goblins, stepping once more into the land of mortals. In his mind, thoughts of Kalindra and the Codex of Oblivion mingled with fears about what he would encounter on the way. Far away on the horizon, the misty mountains, forever they loomed like giant shadows, promising both mystery and danger. Roderic clutched the amulet in his hand, feeling the weight of his mission, but also a glimmer of hope. The alliance between elves and humans was about to truly begin as Roderic and the 6 goblins stepped into the mortal world. The invisible border between the magical realm and the everyday earth seemed to dissolve. Time and space seemed to take on a different consistency, as if reality itself was readjusting to receive visitors from another dimension. The goblins moved graceful, but their presence created a slight flutter in the air, like a breeze which carried a subtle scent of unfamiliar flowers. The forest they were passing through was ordinary to the human eye, but the elves seemed to see it different. Aelana, with her bright eyes, was looking over the trees, and the branches were moving away slightly, creating a clear path. Nature recognizes us, she said, smiling at Roderic. Even if humans have forgotten magic, the earth remembers. Roderic, however, was filled with a contradictory feeling. Although he felt privileged to witness such phenomena, each step he took deepened the burden of his mission. The elf seemed confident, but he was just a mere mortal. Despite these thoughts, he clasped the amulet received from Queen Lirinal in his palm and banished his doubts. Roderic, said Kale, the goblin with impressive strength, who was walking in front of the group. This is not the time to doubt. Carry with you the belief that we are here because we have to be here. Your choice is not an accident. As they advanced, the nature began to grow wilder and wilder. The winding road was now flanked by steep cliffs, and the wind carried a cold echo from the eternal mist mountains. The elves seemed unaffected by the change in atmosphere, but Roderic felt a pressure increasing. This is where the realm of the mists begins, said Lysar, the goblin with the gift of sensing negative energies. He stretched out his hand as if to feel the surrounding air. We are close to the threshold of the eternal mist mountains. From here, the presence of evil becomes more palpable. As the group advanced, the elves began to communicate in whispers. Aelana used the light to guide the way, Taran summoned a gentle breeze to disperse the dense fog, and Muriel, surrounded by small creatures of the forest, seemed to ask them for help. Roderic observed all this with amazement, and with growing anxiety. How will we find Calindra? He asked, breaking the silence. Selena, the elf with a strong connection to nature, answered him. It won't be difficult. Calindra made a pact with nature itself. Even if you can't see it, the forest will reveal it when we get close. You just have to follow the road we open. In the evening, the group arrived in a wide clearing, where the fog was beginning to retreat, and the silver light of the moon made its shy appearance. At the edge of the clearing was a small cabin, built of old wood and overgrown with ivy. It looked deserted, but the elves knew that wasn't the case. This is Calindra's house, Lysar said, feeling the subtle energy emanating from the place. Roderic wrapped his cloak around himself and approached the door. He knocked softly and the old wood creaked under his touch. In a few moments, the door opened and a tall woman with snow-white hair and piercing blue eyes appeared in the doorway. She wore a long cloak decorated with magical symbols sewn with thread of gold. I knew you would come, said Calindra in a deep but gentle voice. Her gaze passed over the elves and stopped at Roderic. You must be the messenger. Enter. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. The walls were lined with shelves of old books, and on a large solid wooden table, there was an open book. The candles burned with a strange, almost silvery flame, and the smell of herbs dry floated in the air. Calindra invited them to sit down, and the elves seemed to relax, feeling that they were safe. I have been waiting for this day for a long time, said Calindra, picking up the book from the table. This is the Codex of Oblivion, the book that contains the knowledge needed to close the portal to Gromi. But know that the magic in this book is not easy to use. It requires a sacrifice and a perfect collaboration between your world and that of the goblins. Roderic felt a cold shiver running down his spine. What kind of sacrifice? He asked with a trembling voice. Calindra stared at him, not answering immediately. Instead, she opened the book and showed him the pages filled with ancient symbols. It is not a physical sacrifice, she said finally. It is a sacrifice of trust. People must give up their distrust of the magic they have forgotten. Only through faith and unity will we be able to close the portal. The elves looked at each other, and Ilora intervened. And if people refuse to cooperate, what will happen then? Calindra closed the book with a deep sigh. Then evil will take over the whole world. The portal cannot be closed only by elves or only by humans. A real alliance is needed. Roderic now understood how difficult his mission was. Not only did he have to convince the people to fight, but he had to make them believe again in the magic they had rejected for so long. When do we start? He asked, determination ringing in his voice. Calindra smiled for the first time. Start right now, but first we must prepare. The portal is becoming increasingly unstable, and the spirits of Gromi will begin to invade the mortal world soon. We must stop them before the darkness spreads. The night passed quickly, and the group decided to return to the human world, where Roderic would take the message of the alliance to his leaders, with the elves and Calindra by his side. He felt that he had a chance to accomplish his mission, however. Deep in his soul, fears continued to haunt him. Beyond the horizon, the eternal mist mountains watched like silent giants, and the shadows of Gromy land stirred, preparing for the first confrontation. Chapter 3. First Shadows of Confrontation. As dawn paled over the wild landscape of the eternal mist mountains, the group of Roderic, the goblins, and Calindra continued their journey to the nearest mortal city, Tharava, a settlement located on the edge of a vast plain. Tharava was known for its vibrant markets and its hard-working people, but lately it has been facing a gloomy atmosphere. The inhabitants of the city were beginning to feel the growing presence of the shadows of Gromy, and rumors of dark beings roaming the surroundings had become more and more frequent. Along the way, the goblins seemed more and more alert, although they had gifts that protected them from many danger. Being close to the mortal world made them vulnerable to dark energies that seeped into human reality. Calindra, however, with her vast experience and knowledge, managed to maintain a subtle shield of protection around to the group. Roderic, riding a stout horse provided by the goblins, could not shake his restlessness. Every step of the horses and every breeze of the wind seemed to bring with it a warning. He thought of his mission and the immense burden that pressed upon his shoulders. Around him, the goblins discussed in whispers the increasingly obvious signs of the approach of the beings from Gromy. "The shadows are moving faster than we expected," said Taran, with a serious voice. "I feel that the first creatures have already started their infiltration. If we don't act quickly, Tharava will become the first victim." Calindra looks up at the sky covered with heavy clouds. "The creatures of Gromy use people's weaknesses to feed desperation. Anger and greed are perfect gateways for their intrusion. If we can bring hope to the city before the shadows take root, we have a chance to drive them out." The city of Tharava was surrounded by a grey stone wall built centuries ago to protect the inhabitants from invasions. At the main gate, the group was greeted by soldiers who looked tired and agitated. Their gazes turned to the goblins, and a charged silence fell. Goblins rarely appeared in the human world, and their presence always attracted suspicion. "Who are you and what are you looking for here?" asked one of the soldiers, pointing his spear at Roderic. Roderic kept his cool. "I am the messenger of King Aldemar. These are our allies from the land of the elves. They have an important mission that concerns the fate of the whole world." The soldiers looked at each other, hesitating. Calindra, who had remained silent until then, took a step forward. With a simple movement of her hand, the air around her seemed to light up slightly, and the soldiers bowed their heads. "Open the gates," she said with calm authority. "Time is against us." Once inside the city, the group was greeted by an oppressive atmosphere. The usually bustling streets were now almost deserted. The few people who ventured outside walked hurriedly, avoiding meeting the gaze of others. Rumors of the dark creatures had spread like wildfire, fueling fear and distrust. "Roderic, we have to find the city council and talk to its leaders," said Calindra. "They must be the first to understand the gravity of the situation." The building where the city council met was an imposing structure, built of white stone, with tall columns that reflected a past glory. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The 5 council members were discussing lit, but stopped abruptly as the group entered. "Who are you?" asked an elderly man dressed in heavy velvet clothes. "And what do these foreigners want?" Roderic stepped forward, trying to look as confident as possible. "I am Roderic, messenger of King Aldemar. These are goblins, our allies, and Calindra, one of the most powerful magical guides. We come with urgent news of an imminent danger that threatens the whole world." The council listens in silence, but their faces betray skepticism. The goblins, though silent, attract everyone's gaze after Roderic explains to them about the creatures of Gromy and the portal that threatens to bring destruction. The leaders of the city began to discuss among themselves. "And what evidence do we have that these stories are real?" asked one of the younger council members. At that moment, Lysar stepped forward. "We don't need words to prove it to you. The shadows are already here, and their signs are obvious. If you don't act now, you'll lose everything you've built." Before the discussion can continue, a loud crash echoes from the central square of the city. People passing by the area began to scream and run in all directions. The group rushed out of the building and was greeted by a terrifying sea. A dark creature made of pulsating shadows and having an amorphous shape had risen in the middle of the square. "It's an Avemra," whispered Taran. "A spirit of disunity, sent to sow chaos and mistrust." The creature emitted a guttural harsh sound, and the inhabitants who watched it seemed to be gripped by an irrational panic. Those closest to it began to argue among themselves, driven of an inexplicable rage. We must act quickly, Kalindra said, opening the Codex of Oblivion. The goblins lined up around the creature, forming a protective circle around the fleeing ones. Roderic, stay behind us, said Kale. This is not a fight for mortals. Aelana raised her hands, and a silver light began to emanate from her palms, targeting the creature. Taryn summoned a gust of wind that began to disintegrate the shadows around the creature, and Selena muttered incantations that tied the creature to the ground, preventing it from expanding. Avemra, however, struggled mightily, and the sound it emitted became increasingly sharp. Kalindra looked up from her book and said, "This creature can only be destroyed by the unity of all. Roderic, you must come and help us." Roderic felt his heart tighten with fear, but he understood that he could not back down. With trembling steps, he approached the circle of goblins and picked up his amulet. Its light began to shine brighter as Roderic focused all his thoughts on his desire to protect the city and its inhabitants. That moment, the goblins and Roderic acted as one soul. Their combined light pierced the creature, which began to disintegrate, leaving only a thin mist behind. The townspeople, who had been watching the scene in silence, began to cheer. Although some of them still seemed skeptics, this was only the first confrontation, and the shadows of Gromi were far from being stopped. However, the victory over Avemra had brought a ray of hope. The city council, witnessing the events, agrees to support the alliance between mortals and goblins. "This is just the beginning," said Kalindra, looking at the charged sky. "But together we have a chance." That night.The became the first bastion of resistance against the shadows in Gromi. The next day, plans for a larger confrontation began to take shape, and Roderic felt for the first time that hope was making its way even through the deepest shadows. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Corners of the Heart. Night had fallen over Thariva, but the usual quiet of the town was replaced by an almost palpable tension. The streets were deserted, but the windows of the houses glowed faintly, showing that the people were awake, worried about the unseen threat. After confronting Avemra, the elves and Kalindra knew that their fight was far from over. The first shadows of Gromi had already passed through the portal, and the remaining beings in the Dark Land, they were not going to stand aside. In the main council chamber of Thariva, the group had gathered to plan their next steps. Kalindra, with the Codex of Oblivion open on a heavy oak table, was studying ancient passages about the nature of the creatures of Gromi. Roderic, the goblins, and several members of the local council stood around her, eagerly awaiting a plan. "We can't just stop at the defense of Thariva," said Taryn, with a serious expression. "The shadows will not stop spreading. If we leave this portal open, every city in this world will eventually fall." Roderic crossed his arms, reflecting on the elf's words. "But how can we fight against an enemy that hides in the shadows? Most people can't even see these creatures." "That's exactly why we're here," Lysar intervened, his soft but firm voice cutting the silence. "Our role is to show mortals the way, to guide them and give them the tools they need to fight. This is the purpose of elves." Kalindra looked up from the pages of the yellowed parchment. "There is a way," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and concern. "But it requires facing the darkest corners of our own hearts. The creatures of Gromi don't just feed on fear and despair. They manipulate what's already inside us: weaknesses, regrets, hidden desires." "How can we combat this?" asked Roderic. "Through unity," answered Kalindra, looking at each person in the room. "Each of you must understand that this is not just a physical battle. It is also an inner battle. If we give in to our own shadows, we give them more power." As the discussions continued, Aelana, the most sensitive of the goblins, felt a strangeness in the air. He stood up suddenly, his gaze alerting everyone else. "Something is coming," she said, almost in a whisper. Kale, the bravest of the goblins, put his hand on the silver dagger he always wore at his waist, while Aelana remained motionless, her goblin eyes narrowed like two thin blades of light. She felt the presence of a dark energy approaching the council room. Without hesitation, she stretched out her delicate hands and drew a protective circle of energy in the air etheria, which began to pulse faintly around the building. Kale moved quickly to the door, followed by Lysar, both ready to face whatever danger. Roderic, though he lacked their supernatural abilities, clenched his sword, heart pounding in his chest. Kalindra, still bent over the codex, remained calm, but there was a rising tension in her voice. "Don't open the door until we know what's beyond," she said. "I've read enough about the creatures of Gromi to know that some of them can change shape to deceive." That moment, a sharp and prolonged noise was heard outside, like a sharp wind hitting an invisible wall. The goblins acknowledged immediately this sound. A direct manifestation of a shadow from Gromi. Aelana turned to the others, her pale face a reflection of the gravity of the situation. He is a messenger of darkness, she said. But it is not a physical being, but rather a projection of Tenebros's world.It has come to intimidate us beyond the massive oak door. The voice of a creature resounds, like a cold echo that penetrates the bones. To mortals and goblins, our warning is simple, though not meddle in Gromy's affairs. This portal is only the beginning. If you try to close it, you will be consumed by your own despair. Tenebros cannot be stopped. Calindra looked up, her slender fingers gripping the edge of the codex. She rose, striding confidently toward the door. We can't let this shadow intimidate us, she said firmly. We must show that we are not afraid. The goblins, along with Calindra and Roderic, formed a line of defense in front of the door. Elana extended the etheric barrier, and Kale, with his silver sword, stepped forward, ready to attack whatever appeared. Show yourself, Kale shouted. We are not hiding from your shadows. The shadow in front of the door began to take shape, forming a tall figure, like a blurry silhouette, with eyes of pale light. It laughed softly, a chilling sound that seemed to fill the entire council chamber. I'm not here to fight, said the creature, his voice carrying a mocking tone. I'm just a sliver of our power, but if you want to drive me away, try. I'll show you how little hope you have. Without warning, the shadow released a dark wave of energy toward the group. Eliana's barrier glowed brightly, but began to give way. Under the force of the attack, Calindra opened the codex, muttering ancient incantations that lit up the room with golden rays. At the same time, Kale and Lysar, they combined their powers, summoning a vortex of goblin light that struck the shadow. For a few moments, the fight seemed balanced, but then, the shadow began to laugh again. Louder and more sinister, forcing them all to retreat. Then Roderic, a step forward, without magic or any special gift. He gripped his sword firmly and said in a loud voice, I may not have powers like the elves or Calindra's knowledge, but I know what it means to fight for the ones you love. You will not defeat us through fear of shadow. This bold statement seemed to unsettle the creature. The shadow stopped for a moment, and the light of the goblin-created vortex grew stronger. Calindra raised her voice, uttering one last incantation from the codex. With a burst of golden light, the shadow disintegrated, leaving followed an echo of his laughter, and the silence that followed. Elana fell to her knees, exhausted. It was just a shard, she said in a weak voice. But that means they know about us, and they are coming. After the fight with the messenger of darkness, the council and the elves regrouped. Despite the victory, they knew that time was not on their side. We have no choice, said Roderic. We must prepare to close the portal as soon as possible. With each passing day, more creatures passed through it. Calindra nodded, closing the codex. But to close the portal we need something more than courage. The ritual requires complete unity between elves, humans, and the magic of the earth. Taran, the leader of the elves, looks at Calindra. And how do we get this unit? By trust, she answered. Each of us must bring our part of light to counter the darkness. Only in this way can we close the portal and prevent the expansion of Gromy. The night deepened even more, but now, instead of fear, a new feeling was beginning to grow in the hearts to those present. Determination. Each of them, human or goblin, understood that the shadows of Gromy could only be defeated by a strong alliance, and the courage to he was facing the darkest corners of the world. The fight was just beginning, and the shadows were waiting impatiently. Chapter 5. Ritual of Light and Army Training. The cold night had covered the land of Forever with a heavy blanket of apparent stillness, but in the great council chamber activity was feverish. After confronting the messenger's shadow, the elves, humans, and Calindra had understood that time was not on their side. The portal to Gromy was becoming more unstable, and the creatures of darkness were preparing to flood the human world. Amidst this growing tension, their alliance was beginning to take shape, but with each step forward new obstacles appeared. Calindra sat bent over the Codex of Oblivion, the ancient book of magic she had received from the Mortalis king. Its yellowed pages were filled with mysterious symbols and incantations written in an archaic language. The goblin Lysar stood beside her, trying to decipher the ancient text. Together they searched for information about a ritual capable of sealing the portal and stop the invasion of creatures from Gromy. The ritual of light, said Calindra, showing a page on which were drawn concentric circles, each marked with magical runes. It is said to have been used once in the ancient era to close a similar gate. Lysar shook her head, her dark gaze reflecting concern. But the price was high. Those who performed the ritual had to sacrifice a part of their soul to create enough pure energy, and he was never sure if the gate was completely sealed. We have no choice, answered Calindra with determination. If we do nothing, the whole world will be lost. We must find a way to gather enough energy without destroying ourselves in the process. While Kalindra and Lysar were working on deciphering the ritual, Roderic and Taran had gathered a crowd of volunteers, both humans and elf, to form a joint army. In the central square of Tharava, the elves demonstrated fighting techniques for the human, and the elders the village told the younger soldiers the old legends of how to fight the shadows. Kale, leader of the war elves, raised his voice over the murmur of the crowd. Your weapons will not be enough against the shadows. Light is the only thing that can really hurt them. Each of you must learn to use torches, mirrors, and anything that can amplify natural or magical light. The people listened intently, but many of they could not hide their fear. The shadows were an unseen enemy, and the idea of facing them head-on unsettled them. Roderic, who felt this fear growing up, she climbs onto a makeshift wooden platform and raises her hand to get their attention. I understand your concerns, he said, his calm but strong voice resonating in the square. None of us have faced anything like this before, but I know that together we can succeed. We are not only fighting for ourselves, but for our families, for the children and for the future of this world. The elves are with us, and their magic will guide us. Together we are stronger than the shadows. Roderic's words had a powerful effect. The murmur of uncertainty began to turn into a murmur of approval, and the humans began to organize with more confidence. The days that followed were filled with training and preparation. The elves taught the humans to use light as a weapon, and Kalindra worked tirelessly to create magical artifacts that would amplify the pure energy needed in fight. 3 Goblin girls, Aelana, Muriel and Silva, proved to be crucial in these preparations. Aelana was a master at creating magical barriers and taught energy-sensitive humans how to use simple runes to protect themselves. Miria, a nature elf, gathered rare herbs and turned them into potions that strengthened body and spirit. Silva, with her ability to control fire, demonstrated how a flame can become a deadly weapon against the shadows. On the other hand, Kale, Taran and Lysar were leading the boys training elves. Finran, a young elf with remarkable dexterity, created intricate traps that could slow the dark creatures. Doran, quieter but just as effective, used his power to manipulate the land, erecting walls and trenches for defense. The last, Valen, he had a rare gift of detecting the presence of shadows even before they became visible, warning others of danger. Despite progress, the tension was palpable. Every human and goblin knew that their preparations were only the beginning. When the creatures of Gromi would attack in force, their fragile alliance would be put to the ultimate test. Late one night, while studying the Codex, Kalindra found a hidden page that hadn't been visible until then. The text glowed faintly under the candlelight, and its symbols seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. Lysar, come quickly! Kalindra shouted, excited but also worried. Lysar, who was meditating nearby, got up and approached the table. Looking at the page, her face darkens. This is the secret I needed, she said, pointing to a phrase written in large, twisted letters. The text revealed that the ritual required not only the unity of humans and elves, but also a special catalyst, a treasure hidden deep within the portal. That the treasure, known as the Eternal Tear, was a magical stone that contained a shard of the primordial light of creation. Without it, the ritual would have been impossible to achieve. We'll have to send a team into the portal, said Lysar, looking at Kalindra. But this is extremely dangerous. The creatures of Gromi will do their best to protect the tear. I knew it wouldn't be easy, answered Kalindra, closing the codex with a heavy sigh. But we have no other choice. We will choose the best of us for this mission. The next morning, the Alliance Council met to discuss the plan to recover the Eternal Tear. The goblins, who knew the portal, were the best suited for this mission. But Roderic insists that the people must also be represented. This is a crucial moment, he said. We can't let the elves take all the risk. If this alliance is true, we must fight together. To the end, Kalindra agreed, and the plan began to take shape. The team that would enter the portal would be made up of Kale, Aelana, Muriel, Finran, Valen, and Roderic. Each brought unique abilities, and together they hoped to be strong enough to face shadows and retrieve the tears. The sun began to set. Preparations were almost complete, and in the central square, humans and elves gathered to show their support for the team that was about to embark on one of the most dangerous missions in their shared history. Every person in the crowd knew that the success of this team was essential to the survival of their world. Aelana, the spiritual leader of the goblins, looked around, gathering courage from a unity of those present. Despite the differences between humans and elves, fear, hope and determination now united them in a common purpose. This is not just a war of magic or shadows, she said, her voice shining with determination. It is a war for our hearts and souls, and together we will win in the light of the rising moon. The chosen team set out for the portal behind them. The entire alliance watched them go, with unspoken prayers and hopes. The night ahead had to be a decisive one, and the sacrifices were just beginning. As the chosen team advanced through the forests surrounding the portal, the tension grew with each step. The darkness seemed to grow denser, and the usual sounds of nature had disappeared, leaving room for an oppressive silence. Each member of the team was aware that the road they were traveling was strewn with dangers, and safety was not guaranteed. Roderic walked at the head of the group, hand on his sword, ready to face any danger. Aelana, the goblin in charge of magical protection, held a glowing crystal that emitted a gentle light, protecting the group from the negative energies around them. Finran, the master goblin of traps, he walked a few paces ahead, scanning the terrain for hidden dangers. As they neared where the portal was, the atmosphere became harder and harder. Each step seemed more difficult, as if the air itself was becoming an obstacle. Muriel, the nature elf, was using her powers to remove the black, gnarled roots that seemed to spring to life, trying to block their way. "We are close," said Kale, who was walking behind the group, his eyes carefully analyzing every shadow around. "I feel the energy of the portal.It is unstable. We must be quick," added Valen, who focused his senses on the shadow that stretched above them. "The creatures of Gromi sense our presence. They will not delay in attacking us." When they arrived in front of the portal, the scene was both impressive and terrifying. The portal opened like a wound in the fabric of reality, a black hole that pulsed with a dark light and strange around him. The air seemed to vibrate, and a dull sound, almost like a call, could be heard in the background. "This is the portal," mutters Roderic, looking with wide-open eyes. "He seems alive." "It is more than a simple portal," explains Aelana in a serious voice. "It's a window between worlds, powered by the energy of darkness. If we don't close it, it will become powerful enough to release Tenebros's entire army." The group began to organize. Finran and Muriel were placing protective stones around the portal, creating a temporary barrier to delay the invasion of creatures from Gromi. Aelana began preparing the runes for the light ritual, while Roderic and Kale patrolled the portal, making sure nothing surprised them. Their time was limited. It wasn't long before the first creature in Gromi appeared. From the shadow of the portal emerged a demon with a dark body covered in shiny scales and red eyes that seemed to burn with a light of its own. "He's a portal guard," Kale shouted, raising his shining sword. "Don't let him interrupt the ritual." The creature let out a guttural howl and lunged at the group. Roderic lunged forward, blocking the attack with his sword. Next to him, Valen used a magic mirror to focus a beam of light on the demon, causing it to retreat with a hiss of pain. "The light works," Roderic shouted, encouraging the others. "Focus your attacks." As the creature was weakened by the beams of light, Finran managed to activate a trap that trapped the demon in an energy field. With a final howl of rage, the creature disappeared in a cloud of dark smoke. After this confrontation, the group knew that they didn't have much time left. Aelana had finished drawing the magical runes around the portal, and the crystal of light she was carrying was beginning to vibrate with intense energy. "We will start the ritual," she said, with a firm voice. "But you must protect us. The creatures of Gromi will do their best to stop us." Roderic, Kale, and the others formed a defensive circle around Aelana and the runes. She began to cast her incantations. The air became increasingly as hard as possible, and the portal began to pulsate violently. From the shadows, other creatures appeared, attracted by the released energy. The fight that followed would be a decisive one, and each member of the group knew that their lives were at stake, but their hope had not vanished. With every ray of light, with every incantation spoken, the alliance demonstrated its power, facing the darkness with unwavering resolve. As the ritual continued, the light of the crystal became more and more intense, illuminating the entire area like a beacon of hope. It was only the beginning of the fight, but their courage and determination showed that the darkness would not win without a fight in measure. Chapter 6. Oath of Fire. The battle to seal the portal continued, but the challenges grew in intensity as the shadows of Gromi seemed to gain ground. As the crystal of light radiated ever more intense energy, the team led by Roderic and Aelana faced an unexpected dilemma. A sacrifice was needed to complete the ritual. The ritual initiated by Aelana began to create waves of energy that vibrated around the portal, forcing it open to fluctuating. The creatures of Gromi, hurrying to cross the threshold of the mortal world, were temporarily repulsed, but the battle was far from won. Kale, with his shining sword, and Roderic, armed with the power of courage and strategy, fought shoulder to shoulder to protect the magic circle formed by Aelana. The goblins Finran, Miriel, and Valen continued to build additional barriers, trying to buy time. While the goblins Arindra and Lisana supported the magical incantations with ritual chants and a moment of respira, Aelana looked up at Roderic. "There is a problem," she said in a weak but still firm voice. "The energy of the portal is much stronger than we anticipated. The crystal of light alone will not be enough to close it permanently." "What does this mean?" Roderic asked with a dark look. Aelana avoided eye contact for a moment before answering. "A sacrifice is required. One of us will have to give up some of his life essence to fuel the energy needed to close the portal." His words fell like a thunderbolt upon the group, and no one spoke, but the tension was palpable. Roderic clenched his fists. "We cannot ask for such a thing. There must be another way." "We don't have time to look for another way," replied Aelana, determined. "The shadows grow stronger and stronger, and every second we waste allows them to cross the portal." As the discussions continued, a huge shadow descended over the landscape. Out of the portal materialized Umberath, the master of eclipses, a creature of gigantic proportions, with black wings that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. "Did you dare to oppose our will?" boomed Umberath's voice, which seemed to echo from all corners of the forest. "No one can stop the darkness pouring out of Gromi. You will all be consumed." At that moment, the darkness became absolute. Umberath's wings unfurled, creating a magical eclipse that plunged the entire area into an impenetrable night. The only light left was that of the crystal of light, which now vibrated frantically, as if trying to fight the overpowering wave of darkness. "Don't let darkness enter your hearts," cried Aelana. "This is his strategy. His darkness feeds fear and despair." Roderic and Kale immediately launched into battle. Umberath lashed out with his powerful wings, trying to destroy the protective barriers. The two warriors attacked relentlessly, using their shining weapons against him. "It's too strong," Kale shouted, trying to hold back a devastating blow. "Don't give up," replied Roderic. "Any darkness can be defeated with light." Aelana, as she continued the ritual, began to channel the crystal of light's energy into the two warriors' weapons, giving them the power they needed to counter Umberath's attacks. The goblins, meanwhile, worked together to temporarily seal other breaches in the protective circle. The fight against Umberath continued, but Aelana knew their time was running out. In a moment of relative calm, she turned to Roderic, said with determination, "If no one makes the decision, I will do it myself. The portal must be closed at any cost." "Not," Roderic protested, his gaze full of anger and despair. "We can't lose anyone. We'll find a way together." That moment Lisana, one of the elves in the team, stepped forward. "I will make the sacrifice," she said in a calm but courageous voice. "I have been blessed with a long and magical life. If my sacrifice can protect both worlds, then it is a price I am willing to pay." "Lisana, you can't," Aelana began, but the elf raised a hand, stopping her. "It's my decision," said Lisana, looking at everyone with unwavering gentleness. "And you must fight on. Make my sacrifice not in vain." With a heavy heart, Aelana modifies the incantations to channel Lisana's vital essence into the crystal of light. The goblin stepped into the center of the magic circle, closing her eyes and accepting the fate that awaited her. As the ritual progressed, the crystal began to radiate with unimaginable intensity. Its light pierced the darkness created by Umberath, forcing the creature to retreat with a howl of rage. "You will not win," Umberath thundered, but the light was becoming too strong even for him. In a final gesture, the creature retreated into the portal, which began to shrink as the crystal's light consumed the dark energies. When it was all over, the portal was gone and the crystal of light, now without a glow, remained in Aelana's hands. In the place where Lisana had stood, only a luminous flower remained, a symbol of her sacrifice. When the darkness dissipated completely, the warriors and elves stood still, contemplating their costly victory. Lisana's sacrifice had been decisive, but her loss had left a deep ache in everyone's hearts. "We haven't won the war yet," said Aelana, looking at the others. "But we won an important battle." Lisana's sacrifice gave us the necessary time to prepare for what's to come. Roderic, with his eyes fixed on the luminous flower, clenched his fists. "We will not let her death be in vain. We will fight to the end for both worlds." With these words, the group returned to the camp, carrying with them the burden of loss, but also a new determination. They knew that the shadow in Gromi did not had given up, and Tenebros would send other creatures into the world. But now, the alliance was stronger, more united, and more determined than ever to fight the darkness. After the portal had been temporarily sealed and the creatures in Gromi banished, an oppressive silence settled over the battlefield. The group, now physically and emotionally exhausted, found their place in a tight circle around the crystal of light, which was now nothing more than a simple stone devoid of luster. Lysanna's sacrifice, it had been a painful price, but without which victory would not have been possible. Roderic laid his sword down, looking towards the dark horizon. The air seemed to clear, but the traces of the battle were still alive: fallen trees, smoke trails, and an invisible weight that hovered over everyone present. "It's not a complete victory," said Aelana, whispering more to herself. "The portal is only temporarily sealed. Tenebros will not stop here." "But we bought time," replied Finrand, the goblin with hair like morning gold. His voice was full of determination, but his eyes betrayed a deep sadness for the loss of Lysanna. After the battle, the group retreated to a makeshift camp, sheltered in the forest. Here Aelana, Roderic Cale, and the remaining goblins gathered to discuss the next steps. In the center of the circle, the crystal, the lights lay dormant, a reminder of the price paid. "We need a plan," Aelana began, breaking the silence. "Lysanna's sacrifice gave us a chance, but sealing the portal is only a temporary solution. If we want to win this war, we must strike at the source in Gromi." "Gromi is a land of shadows inaccessible to mortals," said Irindra, the goblin who had accompanied the group from the beginning. "Even for elves, getting there is an almost impossible mission." "But we can't wait for nothing," replied Roderic, his tone full of determination. "Tenebros and his creatures will regroup. We must take the initiative before they can open another portal." Cale, who had been silent until then, intervened. "We must discover a way to recharge the crystal of light. It is the only weapon that can fight the darkness in Gromi, but for that, we need the pure magic of nature." Aelana told them about an old legend of the goblins, which mentioned a sacred place called the Spring of Eternal Lights. It was said that this spring, hidden in the depths of an inaccessible mountain, contained the pure essence of light, capable of reactivating magical artifacts, such as the crystal of light. "It is a dangerous journey," she warns. "But it is our only hope. The spring is guarded by the guardians of light, ancient creatures that do not allow anyone to approach." Roderic stood up, looking at the others. "We have no choice. We must go. We will fight if necessary, but we cannot let this evil conquer both worlds." That evening, under a sky full of pale stars, those present made a solemn oath. Roderic, Aelana, Cale, and the remaining elves joined hands around the crystal of light, vowing to fight to the end to protect both worlds. "Lysanna showed us what true courage means," said Roderic, with a serious voice. "We will not let her sacrifice be in vain. Together, we will face any danger. Even if we have to venture into Gromi," Finran added with a determined look. In the middle of the group, the crystal of light gave off a pale glow, as if answering their oath. It was a sign that hope still lived, even in face of the darkest times. In the days that followed, the group began preparations for the journey to the Fountain of Eternal Light. Aelana studied the ancient scrolls to locate the spring, while the goblins collected herbs and magical artifacts needed for their protection. Cale trained the group members in the art of combat, making sure they were all ready for any confrontation. At the same time, Roderic worked with the goblins to strengthen their weapons with magic. A significant moment occurred when Irindra, the wisest elf, handed Aelana an old necklace decorated with symbols ancient. "This necklace was worn by the most powerful witches of our race," said Irindra. "It will protect you from the darkest forces and amplify your magic." When everything was ready, the group set off. The goblins, usually easily distracted and jovial, now looked more serious than ever. Roderic and Cale were leading the way, while Aelana, with a crystal of light in her hand, watched over the safety of the group. As they moved away from the camp, the darkness seemed to follow them, and the whispers the wind brought echoes from Gromi. Despite the dangers that awaited them, their oath held them together. "The source of eternal lights is the key," said Roderic. "But even if we get there, we have to be ready for anything. Tenebros will not remain silent." "It's not just a physical journey," adds Aelana. "It is a test of our spirit. We will learn if we are truly ready to face the ultimate darkness." With these thoughts in mind, the group advanced into the unknown, leaving behind the safety of the forest and entering a world where shadows seemed to dominate everything. They were aware that the dangers had only just begun, but their oath bound them to a single mission: to defeat the darkness at any cost. Chapter 7. Realm of the Guardians of Light. The beginning of the journey to the spring of eternal light was marked by a landscape that gradually changed, from dense forests full of life, to barren plains and then to steep cliffs that announced the approach of the forbidden mountains. The wind was cold and harsh, and every step seemed to lead Roderic, Aelana, Kale, and the elves into the heart of a territory forgotten by the world, but charged with a magical energy. Aelana felt how the atmosphere she was getting heavier and heavier, as if burdened by the presence of the guardians of light, ancient entities who watched over the spring. She was aware that these beings would not easily welcome a group of strangers, especially in these troubled times, when the balance between light and darkness was threatened. The spring is not only a source of power, she said during a rest break, sitting next to an improvised fire. It's a sanctuary. If we don't prove ourselves worthy, the guardians will stop us before we reach it. Roderic crossed his arms, staring at the mist-covered mountain ridges. Then we will have to show them that we come with pure intentions. We are not fighting for ourselves, but for all three worlds. As they climbed, the group reached a strange valley, where time seemed to dilate and the shadows became denser. It was the Veil of Oblivion, a place shrouded in eerie silence, broken only by indistinct whispers that seemed to come from all directions. Erindra, the elf with knowledge extended about the magical realms. He had warned the others that the valley was a test. Those who entered here had to face their deepest fears and regrets. Each of us will see something different, she said. And we must remember that everything we see here is an illusion. But that doesn't mean it can't hurt us. The first to succumb under the burden of the visions was Sinister, a young and brave elf. In the middle of the valley, she began to tremble, looking at his hands as if they were covered in blood. I betrayed them. I let them die, she whispered, falling to her knees. Roderic approached her, lifting her from the ground. Sinister, concentrate. What you see is not real. You are not alone. We're with you. Each member of the group went through their own trials. Roderic saw himself in the position of a failed leader, unable to save his people from the invasion of the creatures of Gromi. Aelana was revisiting her past, the moment when she had lost her mentor, accusing herself of not being strong enough to save him. The goblins, with all that they were magical beings, they were not exempt from fear and regret. Only through collective efforts did they manage to get out of the Valley of Oblivion. But not without scars. Emotional. Roderic and Aelana, in particular, seemed quieter than usual, thinking about their own weaknesses and how close they had come to giving in after passing the valley. The group arrived at the foot of the mountain where the Spring of Eternal Lights was located. Here, their path was blocked by three imposing figures, shining with a golden light. They were the guardians of light, ancient beings that resembled with living statues, each in the form of a sacred animal. A lion, a hawk, and a deer. The lion, the greatest of the guardians, stepped forward, and his voice resounded like thunder. Who dares to enter this sacred land? Aelana stepped forward, holding the crystal of light in her hands. We are allies of elves and humans. We come in search of the fountain of eternal lights to recharge the crystal and fight against the darkness that threatens all worlds. The falcon spread its huge wings and a strong breeze swept through the mountain. Why should we think you are worthy? Many have come before you, and their hearts were not pure. The sacrifice of our friend Lasonna is proof of our purity, said Erindra, before Roderic intervened. And we swore to give our lives for this cause. We come not for power, but to save everyone. The Guardians decided that the group had to pass a final test to prove that their intentions were sincere. The test consisted of crossing a bridge of light which spanned a deep chasm. Each step on the bridge exposed the travelers to a wave of painful memories and intense emotions. Roderic was the first to step on the bridge. Feeling immediately as fear overwhelms him, in front of his eyes appeared the face of a little girl who accused him of not saving her from the clutches of the creatures of Gromi. His heart seemed to break, but he remembered his oath and the cause for which he was fighting. With an effort superhuman, continues on her way. Aelana, for her part, saw the image of her mentor, accusing her of letting magic fall into the wrong hands. She felt the guilt it paralyzes her. But she remembers Lasonna's sacrifice and the group's trust in her. With tearful eyes, they managed to reach the other side. The goblins, although still connected to magic, also go through difficult times, but their unity helps them find the strength to move forward. At the end of the bridge, the group came upon the Fountain of Eternal Lights, a natural fountain that emitted such a strong light that it seemed to banish all the surrounding shadows. The crystal of light, which had been inactive until now, began to vibrate in Aeliana's hands. This is the moment, she said, approaching the spring. But we must know that any mistake can destroy us. However, Aelana gathers her courage and plunges the crystal into the spring. Blinding light pours out everywhere, and the group feels an overwhelming energy fill their hearts. The crystal, now recharged, glows with an intensity beyond anything they could imagine. The Guardians of Light, impressed by the courage and determination of the group, turned to them for last time. You have proven yourself worthy, but your mission is just beginning. The crystal of light is now more powerful, but its power must be used wisely. Gromy land cannot be defeated by force alone. You need heart unity and sacrifice. These words, the group set off again, this time with a strong weapon and a renewed faith. The source of eternal lights had given them more than the necessary energy, it had given them hope. The fight to save the worlds was far from over, but for the first time, they felt ready to face whatever came their way. After the crystal of light was recharged at the well of eternal lights, the group prepared to leave the sacred mountain. Although they had managed to gain the strength to continue the fight against the creatures of the